Hello, BookTube. Welcome to another non-fiction review. Now, in last Thursday's Middlemarch meditation video, we talked about pilgrimage, and that theme is equally fitting for the book that we're going to look at today. And so, you will get to see more photos of the pilgrimage I made along with the person who watches our television to London just over a week ago to ride the new Elizabeth line. The picture you see here is a train waiting for passengers in Abbey Wood Station, which is the easternmost terminus of the Elizabeth line. The book is Neil MacGregor's Living with the Gods, published by Penguin in 2019. Can I summarize this book? On page 131, in the chapter about prayer, Neil MacGregor notes how many different faiths use objects of one kind or another to help the mind disengage from the busy day-to-day thinking and focus instead on higher, better things. There is a way in which you could say that MacGregor has selected a number of objects which were either permanent or temporary exhibits at the British Museum and used them to draw our attention to the common ground across religions, common concerns, common beliefs, and common practices. The book is a print version of the BBC Radio 4 series of the same name, which aired in the autumn of 2017. What is known about the author? Robert Neil MacGregor was born in Glasgow in 1946, and he had a long academic career by anyone's standards, beginning with a degree in modern languages at Oxford, which was followed by philosophy at École Normale Supérieure in Paris, and then finally law at Edinburgh University. He was called to the bar in 1972, but decided instead to study art history at the Courtauld Institute, University of London. He seems to have found his true passion in art. He taught art history at Reading University until 1981, when he became editor of the Burlington magazine, the longest-running art journal written in English. In 1987, he became the director of the National Gallery, and in 2002 became director of the British Museum. He has created two long-running BBC Radio 4 series, which I will mention later. He retired in 2015, and yet, now at 77, he is still writing and talking about art. In 2022, he presented the BBC series The Museums That Made Us, and he gave the first Octavia Hill lecture in February this year, sponsored by the National Trust. I have included a link to the YouTube video of that lecture in the description box. How is this book structured? The book is divided into 6 themed sections with 5 chapters per section. If we pick part 2, just as an example, the title is Believing Together, and this section has chapters which examine particular objects while discussing how different religions have developed communal practices around death, birth, coming of age, and how activities like prayer and music strengthen the bond between believers. The text proper is 470 pages, but bear in mind that contained within those pages are 471 illustrations. Now, these are referenced in very tiny font on pages 472 to 475, and you will also need a magnifying glass for the further reading list on pages 476 to 478, the acknowledgements on page 479, and the subject index on pages 480 to 488. That's if you're looking at the paperback version. Why did I choose to read this book? Religion has interested me from a very early age. I was not raised in any faith. Neither of my parents had any religious affiliation. I did have religious grandmothers. I was informed by some relative that the reason I was baptized Lutheran and not Episcopalian was to pacify the grandmother who would care more about the denomination. When I was young, I think I approached religion as something to get right. You know, one of those life skills you check off your list, like graduating from high school or getting your driver's license, except of course I would have said that it was much more important than that. For anyone who is following my Middlemarch meditations, I gotta confess that George Eliot's Dorothea Brooke reminds me quite a bit of the kind of person I was then, you know, very intent, but seeing only what I was intent upon. I would say that my focus was too narrow when I was younger, as if spirituality was the same thing as hitting the bullseye on a target. That gradually changed, and what I enjoy most now is reading books like Living with the Gods, that surveys the whole territory of human spirituality and gives me food for thought. How did I get this book and how much did it cost? Well, this was another library book from my local library, which is volunteer run. And recently it was able to extend its opening hours to Tuesday evenings. Yeah, previously I could only visit if I happened to work from home on a Friday or I went in on a Saturday morning. The new Tuesday evening slot means I'm visiting the library more often, and this has consequences. Nice consequences. Have you encountered anything unexpected or interesting about this book? MacGregor's comparative survey of different faiths, it's not the first of this kind of book for me, anyway. I've read similar books by Karen Armstrong. I'm thinking of A Short History of Myth and The Great Transformation, and also the writings of Joseph Campbell. They, like MacGregor, provide detailed analyses of the similarities across religions. MacGregor's work is particularly appealing because it relies so heavily on the visual, on the beautiful objects that are associated with religion. It did remind me of one work by Joseph Campbell. In 1974, he published The Mythic Image, and that also had some beautiful religious imagery along with the text. Now, MacGregor's book has the potential, I think, to reach more readers than Campbell for these reasons. The chapters in Living with the Gods are shorter. The writing style is edited for broadcast on public radio, so there has to be a premium placed on clarity to the general public, the broadest general public. And lastly, MacGregor is not the only voice giving an opinion. A glance through the acknowledgements will show the number of religious and academic authorities who contributed content. Is there anything readers should be prepared for if they decide to read this book? If this book interests you for the artwork, do not settle for less than the hardcover version, where there are more color images on larger pages with better quality paper. Even if you're more interested in the ideas, the loss of image quality in the paperback edition, it's not irrelevant. For example, consider the final chapter. It discusses what inspired the making of the Lampedusa cross, produced from the salvaged wreckage of refugee ships lost during the crossing from North Africa to Europe. The color image, which you see here, has much greater emotional impact than the black and white, smaller one that I had in the paperback version. MacGregor himself is an interesting commentator. According to an interview he gave the Glasgow Herald, the city he grew up in was, quote, totally divided religiously, and one of the reasons he decided not to continue a career in law was because it would confine him to Scotland. He says, quote, I knew I wanted to be free to work someplace else. He continues to have a connection with Christianity, but he hesitated when he was described as devout. And this is his quote from the Herald interview. I never quite know what people mean by devout Christian. I would define my relationship to the Christian church as the framework in which I ask questions. I would have great difficulty in articulating what I believe. I regard most of the narrative as a mythic narrative and not a historic one. But as a mythic narrative, it seems extraordinarily compelling. It's a narrative that encompasses suffering, idealism, the cost of moving towards a society that we want to have. Whatever bits you consider historically true or not seems to me very secondary. There is a poetic truth that seems to me very enriching. I go regularly to St. Martin's in the Fields, which is a church that exists really to explore what this means rather than assert what it is. And please check the description box for a link if you want to read that full Glasgow Herald interview. Anything else interesting to know about this book? Well, of course, there will be big ideas discussed, the greatest of which I think is how we continue to live with each other while respecting different religious identities. One assertion which did set me thinking was that the development of monotheism may have been a necessary intellectual step towards scientific inquiry. Now let's see if I can précis the concept as MacGregor put it. He argued that when humans conceive of multiple deities or other worldly beings which are explaining material phenomenon that the people don't yet understand, well, you've got a situation where you've got individual beings acting individually, often opposing each other, of course, as we know from ancient myths. Therefore, the idea that there might be some over-organizing framework or structure or logic that's discoverable and provable, well, MacGregor suggests that's a conclusion that's less likely to be reached when you're thinking in a polytheistic worldview. Whereas if your concept of the divinity concentrates all agency into a single supreme being, well, then it's no great leap of logic to conclude that this singular intelligence must have a purpose or a manner of operating, and that discovering that purpose, well, not only might it be possible, but it would be a very worthwhile endeavor. But it would be incorrect to assume, and I'm going to say this with a stress underneath it, it'd be incorrect to assume that MacGregor favors monotheism. A great part of the book focuses on the lack of tolerance in monotheism, which is also, it's no great leap of logic either, is it? If there is only one God, or one denominational church, or one political party, or one economic theory, everyone who does not recognize these singular truths, well, they're an obstacle, aren't they? They're a problem that needs to be solved. MacGregor demonstrates how nationalism has led a normally tolerant polytheism, like Hinduism in India, to become about as intolerant as monotheism at times. But the book is also full of small surprises. You know, stuff for a good trivia quiz. Did you know, for example, that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer did not exist before 1939, and he was the invention of New York department store Montgomery Ward? Or did you know that both Spanish and English explorers took turns attempting to drain a whole lake in the Colombian Andes in their search for the fabled land of El Dorado? Or did you know that the earliest atheist state was not the Soviet Union, but revolutionary France? So lots of fascinating facts. Finally, do I have any ideas, suggestions for follow-up reading? Because this book would equally appeal to readers who are interested in art, in particular periods of history or religion, then further reading choices, they're going to be highly individual. So I recommend the further reading list supplied at the back of the book. It's arranged chapter by chapter, which is brilliant because it's likely to be that a particular chapter is going to be the impetus, the topic that pushes your yes, I am interested buttons and makes you want to find out more. Anyone listening in the United Kingdom can also tune in to episodes of Living with the Gods on BBC Sounds, along with Neil MacGregor's other notable 2009 series, A History of the World in 100 Objects. I will leave links to both of those in the description box. Okay, everybody, to sum up, we have made it to the end. I feel that this review has reset the balance I like to keep between fiction and non-fiction reading. So what is coming up next? I am at the 88% mark with a book which was longlisted in 2016 for the annual Canada Reads competition. It was a choice driven by my desire when I finished my English literature degree to put a priority on reading new voices, voices that were not me. Now, given how it's been so far, it may be more informative for me when the time comes to make a sideline video that happens to contain a review. And that's because my response to the novel, in this case, will probably be helpful knowledge for you to have if you decide to read Tracy Lindbergh's debut novel, Birdie. I look forward to seeing you all again then, okay? Thanks for joining me. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.